our next speaker, Aid Klulo, I hope I pronounced it right, will be talking about cybersecurity and sustainability. I have a short biographic note on Aid, and you have similar one on the web page also. Aid has an MSc from Bournemouth University and an MA from King's College London. The first year's career, Aid's first year's career was as an army officer for 25 years, with roles covering a range of disciplines, including operational experience from deployment in Iraq and Kosovo, together with defense diplomacy activity in East Africa. In 2012, he delivered a strategic communication in Somalia for the UN, concerning the defense reform in the Middle East with the Qatari Armed Force. Before moving to cybersecurity. He is now a senior advisor in the NCC group, helping clients maximize their investments in cybersecurity. The NCC group is specialized in cybersecurity and risk mitigation, so just a framework. I could go on with other interests from Aid, such as writing. He published recently a book. You can go and check the name of the book. It's another it's part of your life, I think. It's also he enjoys exploiting other fields, such as the deeper understanding of autism, as I read. So it's a vast experience, life experience, and especially experience in cybersecurity. That's what concerns us now. So, Aid, whenever you want, just start.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed for that introduction. It's quite interesting to listen. It's quite interesting to listen to, in a sense, your life story, and to wonder where on earth all the years went. And so anyway, yes. So I've been fortunate to live a fairly interesting and varied lifestyle, and not just in the UK, but all over the world. I've lived here in Portugal. I've got a great affinity with this city of Porto, and so it's a real delight to be here, and it's a real pleasure to be able to talk this afternoon on cybersecurity with an emphasis on people and also sustainability. So I would like to first of all thank my fellow speakers throughout the day, because it's been absolutely fascinating. It's been absolutely fascinating to listen to the various subjects that have been discussed, and as always with these events, you always end up learning something, and that's what it's been like for me today. So really, thank you very much for everybody for their very rich insights in their respective areas of expertise. And I'm delighted to be here to talk about cybersecurity at the end of the day. So thank you for staying, everybody. Because without cybersecurity underpinning our digital economy and our goals for sustainability, we will all be vulnerable to cyber attack in the future. So the presentation will not be overly technical. You'll be very pleased to hear. I think the prize for that will go to this morning's presentation on AI. And there are lots of pictures. So I really want to just tell a few stories and talk about what's happening in the world of cybersecurity with an emphasis on people. And I'll have 3 takeaways, which I'd like you to keep in your mind by the end of the talk. So as you can see from the screen, it's been quite a busy old time for cyber attacks in the last 12 to 18 months, with many very high profile incidents. Of course, this is only a very, very small number of them up here. But what's been going on? Well, the ongoing theft of intellectual property by nation states, ransomware attacks on entire governments, cyber attacks impacting national rail networks, the use of hackers for hire in the geopolitical games that are taking place every single day. And of course, the brilliant BBC radio podcast, The Lazarus Heist, which I really do recommend that you listen to if you've never heard of it or come across it. But in cyber, nothing ever stands still. In the UK alone, 32% of businesses suffered at least one cyber attack last year. And in the EU, according to French defense company Thales, cyber attacks have been on the increase from 10% to 46% between September 2022 and March of this year. And directly related to the Ukraine conflict, Thales believes that 61% of the attacks recorded globally since 24th of February last year have been of Russian origin. Attribution can sometimes be difficult, but eventually digital fingerprints, methods of operation are telltale signs of who is behind an attack. And the targets of those attacks have been countries that have been giving the most support to Kyiv. The exact figure is hard to pin down, but it's estimated that cyber criminals are earning hundreds of millions of dollars every year. And that's a very, very conservative estimate. Ransomware in the last 3 months alone has increased by 30%. So let's look at ransomware attacks. These have really increased significantly in Portugal over the last 18 months. There have been some attacks on very high profile breaches and on some of the country's best known institutions, such as TAP, and they have my data as a result of that. The Lisbon Port Authority, the Armed Forces, and Vodafone, just to name a few. But what does all this mean to the individual? In most cases, not really that much. Most people won't be directly affected by a ransomware attack or impacted by it. Because if a large organization has failed to protect itself, then it's that large organization that is going to pay the price. You know, if they didn't put the right cyber controls in place in the first place, then clearly they are going to be vulnerable. But it's not always true that people are not affected. In May 2021, Ireland's health system was infiltrated by a ransomware gang. And having been inside their network for many weeks, they then deployed malware. And the diagram shows the sort of basics of the attack. They then deployed malware that brought the entire system to a halt. And soon afterwards, the decision was taken to shut the network down completely to prevent further damage and loss. Can you imagine being the CEO and having to make that decision under those circumstances? The impact to ordinary citizens in Ireland and to the health system in general was catastrophic. Important appointments were cancelled, waiting lists grew, disruption was widespread, and medical staff reverted to using pen and paper. We don't know if the cancellation of a vitally important appointment led to someone's death, but it would have had, at very least, a significant disappointment and frustration factor for everybody involved. And even though the decryption key was provided by the ransomware gang to unlock the millions of files that had been encrypted, soon afterwards, it still took months for the system to get back to business as usual operations. And as you can see, the cost as at the end of 2022 was quite significant. In other words, ransomware gangs are not going to go away anytime soon. In fact, we learned a lot about cyber criminal gangs after a Ukrainian hacker, unhappy about his own ransomware gang taking sides when Russia invaded Ukraine, they released a wealth of data from the Conti ransomware gang, from their own network, which gave us a real insight into how organized they are. It's ironic, really, that it's a classic insider attack. And the slide in front of you shows you all of the characters that the research that was taking place on those files that were released. All the individuals in that gang, the thicker lines have got greater traffic between individuals. And from that, a number of assumptions were drawn. Cyber criminals now have offices. There are hierarchies, as we can see, HR teams, customer service teams, water coolers, fruit bowls. And in one case, somebody who was applying for a job bypassed the HR department, approached a respected hacker within that gang and asked for a job, and that person then got that job. They have a refer a friend scheme for new hires. And they even have an Employee of the Month award. In other words, ransomware as a service has become a lucrative business, and it has been professionalized. The days of thinking of hackers only being teenagers sitting in their bedrooms causing havoc are long gone, although of course they still exist. So the threat that comes from state and non-state actors, generally based in Russia, North Korea, Iran, and China, is serious. Ransomware is a much talked about risk to businesses and organizations, and rightly so. And the barriers to entry are lowering every day. In effect, anyone sitting in any one of those countries I've mentioned, which generally turns a blind eye to the activities of hacking groups or individuals, or indeed they encourage it, anybody can act with impunity. And by doing so, they undermine the free and democratic use of the internet. And I think we should all be very concerned by this situation. And certainly you don't want to see this on your laptop or your desktop, which is a genuine message that popped up during a ransomware attack. So how does ransomware work? Well, initial access brokers scan the internet for weaknesses in internet-facing networks. And once they know how to enter a network, they then sell that access via auctions on the dark web. Access for a large organization could be anywhere between 3,000 and 5,000 euros. Ransomware gangs, some of whom have very little experience of conducting this type of attack, then buy access and gain entry to the network themselves to deploy the malware that encrypts the system's data. And in some cases, they then extract the data as well to use that as a threat to speed up the ransom payment. Sometimes they just release the data onto the internet anyway, and this is a trend that we're seeing. And this mostly happens on the dark web. So what is the dark web? Let's have a quick look at the internet. So in case this hasn't been explained to you before, think of the internet as an iceberg, and the tip that's exposed is what we call the open or surface web. The body of content is on web servers, accessible from web browsers such as Yahoo, Google, Bing, DuckDuckGo, Dogpile, and other imaginatively titled search engines. And this accounts for about 5% of the internet. Then there is the deep web, which is accessible from the open or surface web, but it may not be accessible for search engines because of one of several reasons, mainly because the information is behind password, or they are password protected, should I say. So content is proprietary or involves personally identifiable information, for example. So in other words, the cloud. And this makes up the vast majority of the internet, probably around 94.9%. And then there is the dark web, so-called because the activity that takes place there is generally of a criminal nature, where our data is traded, credentials are bought and sold, and where the fate of thousands of organizations and people across the world is shaped. It accounts for about 0.1% of the internet, and it's the anonymity that is afforded to individuals who use the dark web means that criminals favor it for the illicit activity that they are involved in. And this is, of course, where access to organizations is traded, as I say. But to counter this, cyber threat intelligence teams spend time in the dark web looking for evidence of breaches by these initial access brokers. By seeing the auctions take place in real time, they can see which businesses have been breached. If those businesses are clients of that team, they will tell those clients. Those clients can then respond to that. They can patch any internet-facing networks that perhaps they hadn't patched up until that point, or take any other action that they can to try and prevent a more serious breach. Now, clearly, nothing is as clear-cut as that or as simple as that, but this is what is going on every day, and how responsible and capable cybersecurity companies are trying to get one step ahead of the criminals. Sometimes there are distributed denial of service attacks, DDoS attacks, that take place. These aim to knock systems out by overloading them with traffic. And in fact, I was talking earlier and talked to somebody who had experienced a DDoS attack themselves. And there's also wiperware, which when deployed simply destroys all of the data in a system, leaving it irrecoverable and useless. And this is what happened when a Russian-backed gang deployed malware on the Viasat satellite communications network 1 hour before the invasion on 24th of February last year. The gang behind the attack knew the system was used extensively by Ukrainian organizations, and they were correct in that assessment, but failed to appreciate or didn't care the global nature of communications. And the impact was felt much more widely. As a result, a major German energy company lost remote monitoring access to over 5,800 wind turbines, losing a combined output of around 11 gigawatts. In France, nearly 9,000 subscribers of a satellite internet service provider had an outage, along with another 13,000 on a different company, also using the Viasat network for their internet access, and that was across several EU countries. And with such a strong push for sustainability, particularly in the energy sector, the proliferation of connected devices, particularly within the operational technology space, so in other words, the industrial space, and the introduction of industrial IoT, Internet of Things, this is opening up new areas of attack for cyber criminals. Think of it as this: anything that can be operationalized by software can be weaponized by software. And the decentralization of sustainable energy projects, such as wind farms, has been enabled by technology. And it is that very same technology that can be its greatest weakness. So as we've heard through the wind farms example, as sustainability is on the increase, together with the digitization of existing organizations, so the supply chain involved grows exponentially. And so too, therefore, does the threat from malicious actors who now have the entire supply chain to attack as well. And many of those companies in the supply chain are small, don't have the resources to ensure that they have the right cybersecurity profiles in place, and they can be vulnerable, and they're connected to the larger organization. So these supply chain attacks are happening more and more. So like the nation state attack on SolarWinds in 2020, a supply chain attack can have collateral damage elsewhere in unintended directions. And the Viasat wind turbine example is just simply that they were caught in the cyber crossfire. We've seen in Ukraine how Russia has deployed hybrid warfare. They have deployed thousands of cyber attacks against Ukrainian targets and targets in other countries deemed to be supporting Ukraine. We've seen Russia deploy cyber attacks on Ukraine's critical national infrastructure, but sometimes these attacks have not been successful. So they then have deployed more expensive kinetic effects to achieve the same result. In other words, they fired missiles to destroy the facilities completely. In general, the energy sector is a prime target for cyber attack, not just from nation states. Ukraine has had to learn the hard way, and they expect to be hit by cyber attacks on a daily basis, and they focus their efforts on preventing these attacks. But then when they happen, they focus everything else on recovering from them to get back to BAU operations as quickly as possible. But it's not only ransomware that can cause financial loss. Business email compromise is also worth an awful lot of money to cyber criminals. And it's based on extensive social engineering, and it can wreak havoc in financial departments and for companies. A well-crafted email that appears to be credible from a senior manager, which contains details that the recipient believes to be true, but in reality have simply been scraped off social media profiles, can lead to bank details changing, supplier payments going into the wrong accounts or the accounts of criminals, instead of the intended recipient. And by the time they find out what they've done, the money has been moved and it's gone. I think we've all had a moment where we wish we could turn back the clock, and I can sense the pain in that image. But it's not only the corporate world that can be impacted by these data breaches. Often personally identifiable information or bank details are stolen as well, although the latter is rare. However, these types of breaches and the result of these types of breaches is knowing as an individual and as individuals that somebody has got our personal data. In some cases, using this data, criminals can then try and fool individuals to give away more details, such as banking credentials, which then leads to direct harm, loss of funds, and the terrible emotional impact on the individual who has been defrauded. In other words, this is something, again, that I think we should all be very interested in. And it's people behind these attacks, and it's people who can defend against them. In the UK, Lindy Cameron is the CEO of the UK's National Cybersecurity Centre. And she's described ransomware as the most acute threat facing the UK. According to this article, COBRA, that sits to discuss emerging crises within the UK government, meets to discuss the impact of cyber attacks more often than any other subject facing the UK. And as we've seen, ransomware is back on the increase again, particularly in the industrial sector. But cybercrime is borderless and transnational. Perpetrators generally live in inaccessible countries. So we must at all times put our collective law enforcement, legal and political will behind chasing down these people, the people behind these cyber attacks. And as Victor Zora, who is the Chief Digital Information Officer in Ukraine, who I've listened to speak a couple of times in the last 12 months, as he suggests, there should be an international court for cyber criminals. And I think he has a point. Perhaps we can talk about that later. But let's return to the theme of my talk, people. And my first takeaway for today. So people are only human. The Optus breach in Australia last year led to 9 million individuals' records being extracted from the network because an API, something that not many people really know about or care about, something that we use pretty much every day accessing information on countless apps, was configured facing the internet without any need for any credentials to be used. And that was human error. Optus claimed it was a sophisticated attack, but in fact, using a domestic analogy, they'd simply left a window open. But more than that, they'd lined all the items of value up on the floor in the front room to help the burglar remove everything in order and really quickly. So while we're talking about securing our house or our flat, let's bring cybersecurity down to a very basic level, to the individual person. The analogy of securing your house to prevent a burglar from gaining entry is no different to really what we're trying to do when operating online, or what we should be doing when we operate online. The automated scans that are happening every second, operated by those who wish to commit crimes by either stealing credentials, encrypting data, or disrupting websites, they will seek out every opportunity to find a vulnerability. So imagine a potential burglar walking up and down the road, looking for windows that are half open and that can be accessed. Except this is now automated, so there are burglars walking up and down every street doing the same thing. But if everything is shut and locked, the burglar will move on to an easy victim elsewhere. Basic cybersecurity hygiene, therefore, is no different to what we do instinctively in our lives. And if you are as secure as you can be online, the average cyber criminal will just go elsewhere. Unfortunately, for 9 million Australians, that wasn't the case. And the impact of these data breaches can be catastrophic. The Optus breach included names, emails, home addresses, phone numbers, dates of birth, passport numbers, driving license numbers, healthcare numbers, you name it. The following month, a massive data breach at Medibank in Australia led to medical records being released onto the dark web. And some of these medical records that were released were of a very personal and intimate nature. And the knowledge that that one's most personal information is now potentially public and could be made public, I think that's unimaginable. So, NCC Group, we're a global company. We have over 2,000 colleagues in North America, across Europe, Asia Pac, and in the UK. And our purpose is to create a more resilient and digital future. Our mission is simple: to make the world safer and more secure. We provide the full range of cybersecurity capabilities to help people conduct digital transformations, to ensure that you meet your regulatory requirements, as well as testing your networks to make sure that they're secure and that they don't have any vulnerabilities. And of course, we do lots more than that. We have, for example, we have a red team, and they comprise of highly skilled ethical hackers, which is recognized in the UK as a market leader. We combine this with a black team, so physical entry capability. And when put together, they're a very powerful force. And the reason why they are so good is because across the company, we think like an adversary. And that's a good position to be in, because if you're always looking for vulnerabilities, then you will always be more aware of where they are. But we also work with boards and senior executives, delivering gold team exercises where we put senior leaders through their paces when dealing with a serious cyber incident. The slide is intentionally blurred, by the way, just in case everybody was thinking, or you snuck off for a glass of wine at lunch. And what we share in these sessions is based on knowledge that we get from real world crises from our incident response team and what they deal with. And I can tell you that some senior leaders are really not as good as they think they are. I've heard the CEO of a FTSE 100 company say that just because it's on Twitter, it doesn't mean that it's in the public domain. I've seen senior leadership team debates about whether to pay a ransom in the middle of a crisis. So we, NCC Group, we're part of a dynamic and highly capable cyber ecosystem within the global private and public sector. And we're here in Portugal as well. But digital technology has a bit of a problem, and it has because it has a huge impact on the climate. Data centers, like this one on the screen, are huge energy consumers. It is a big issue. And let's take an example, a brief example of data centers in Ireland. There are over 70 data centers that are located in Ireland. They bring a lot of job opportunities and economic growth to the areas in which they're based. But as at the end of last year, data centers in Ireland were using approximately 12% of Ireland's entire electricity provision, which really makes it very hard for Ireland to make the changes that need to be made for them to meet their own sustainable goals when it comes to energy consumption. So we must adopt more sustainable practices. So we must design and manage digital infrastructure as efficiently as we can. We must ensure that we reduce waste wherever we can. And we must ensure that, particularly data centers, that they use renewable energy sources. In NCC Group, ESG has been embedded in our group strategy for a couple of years. We're very committed to this. Our 2023 goals are to create a more diverse and inclusive workplace, to reduce our impact collectively on the environment, and for us to be ethical and responsible suppliers to others, and also to be ethically responsible when working within the cybersecurity environment itself. I thought Christina earlier really described the subject brilliantly and very much summed up where I think many organizations should be going when it comes to ESG. So I've mentioned nation state attacks a couple of times this afternoon, and there are many examples of nation state attacks. And this is one. This happened in Iran, where hacktivists targeted an industrial facility in Iran. The hacktivist group, called Predatory Sparrow, it's likely to be a front for Israeli operations, had previously targeted facilities connected with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard. And in this attack, they'd clearly been in the industrial facilities network for quite some time. They took over the CCTV, and they built up a deep understanding of the pattern of life inside that facility. And with a precision that I suppose you can only admire, they waited until all the employees were away from the target location before they launched the attack and caused a fire in the facility. And you could just see on the image the fire starting. In fact, there is a video of that online if you want to go and see it. But this is why there is such a focus on critical national infrastructure in the UK and elsewhere in Europe, why we spend so much time looking at these attacks, and why CNI, critical national infrastructure, and operators of essential services are so heavily regulated, because they keep the lights on. And if we lose that, if we find that the CNI sector is attacked, then it affects all of us. So my second takeaway on the theme of people this afternoon is leadership. There is still a lack of understanding about cybersecurity risk, and because of the intangibility of the technology, in some cases, ignorance wins over curiosity and little is done. Leadership starts in national governments. It's about making the right choices at the legislative and policy levels to help each country's economy to have the appropriate regulations in place to provide a safe and prosperous digital economy. But it's more than that. International cooperation is necessary to share information and combine our collective resources to fight back against those who wish to do us harm. In business, understanding cybersecurity should be a part of good corporate governance for CEOs and boards, to understand how organizations can protect themselves. Cyber is not an IT problem. There are many people who understand IT, but who lack the awareness of cybersecurity. And it's a little bit like speaking English and speaking Spanish. Cyber is a critical business risk which can undermine any organization. In business, depending on the size, financial health, cyber resilience, quality of leadership of that organization, a cyber attack could be existential. As an example, last year, we got a call into our incident response team from a company that operated online and sold handbags. At 9 a.m. that morning, everything was fine. People were browsing, putting them into their shopping trolleys, waiting, getting 10% discount, and then checking out. By 5 p.m. that evening, the website was down, the backups had been wiped, all of the other data was encrypted, and the only information that they had for their suppliers and their customers were telephone numbers that they had on their mobiles. And that was it. That was their start point for a small to medium-sized business making money online, selling fashion. So the final takeaway on my theme of people is security culture. I think this is talked about by many people and organizations, but still there is a lack of awareness of how risky, dangerous the online world can be. And I think it's lost on many people. I've given you several examples of how cyber criminals operate this afternoon. You know, so should we just sort of throw in the towel and just give up and say it's all too difficult? No, of course we shouldn't do that. In cyber, we talk about people, process, and technology like three legs of a stool. If one leg is weaker than the others, then the inherent weakness of the stool overall is clear. If investment is not apportioned appropriately, the stool will not hold the weight that is required of it, and it could collapse. And in most cases, technology is heavily invested because people think technology is the answer. Processes are also similarly invested in because everybody knows in business what processes are required to get the job done. But the one leg that is so often weak and lacks investment is people. So investing in people, investing in our own knowledge of the risks of operating online will bring increased strength to any organization. And whatever level of technical understanding we all have, everyone knows that you don't leave your house without locking it. So why is the mindset different in cybersecurity or to cybersecurity or operating online, if that is easy to understand? Common sense and remembering the phrase, never trust, always verify, will get you a long way down the road of being more resilient as an individual and therefore as part of a wider organization. And when it comes to security awareness and culture, leadership is key, but so too is personal responsibility. Attackers are sophisticated. They do their research, and that is why we all need to be on our guard. For most people listening to this talk, you will frame cybersecurity in a very personal context, trying to avoid banking scams delivered via text message, remembering to avoid reusing passwords that you use on social media and for the bank, keeping an eye out for phishing emails, and minimizing the amount of personal data that you share on social media. And I'd love to tell you that we are winning this battle, but I don't really think we can say that. But we are definitely disrupting the criminal ecosystem, and we're doing what we can within the framework of domestic and international law to do so. The image on your right, behind me, shows that Europol are very active in this area, working with other countries, collaborating to try and bring down networks that are behind cyber attacks, and also therefore the movement of ransomware, the gains from ransomware, so financial assets. The International Counter Ransomware Initiative Coalition is one of those organizations that's trying to do what it can to counter ransomware gangs. In the UK, the National Cyber Force is taking the fight to these malicious actors. And many other countries are doing a very similar activity. But many cyber criminals are rarely prosecuted because they enjoy immunity within the countries in which they are based. And whilst offensive cyber is not the preserve of those states I've mentioned earlier, there are very few countries that will tolerate the activities of cyber criminal gangs on their soil. So my message to you today is that cybersecurity is a real threat to society. And as we've seen in Ukraine, cyber attacks from states who cannot be described as responsible cyber powers will continue to attempt to undermine democratic values and economic security through the types of attacks that you've heard about this afternoon. But like any risk, it needs to be understood. And once you understand the risk, you can mitigate it. Thank you very much. I think I had one more slide, but I think that's just more of a coup type slide, just because I think there's a little bit of leadership and a bit of awareness, and seemed to be a decent metaphor. But But let's go to the next one because that's much more important because it has the title of my book on there as well.